It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you today the Honorable John Sherman, a visionary leader and the current information officer of the Department of Defense. With an illustrious career dedicated to public service and technological innovation, Mr. Sherman has continuously displayed unwavering commitment and remarkable expertise in advancing our nation's defense capabilities through information technology. Throughout his tenure as the DoD CIO, John has spearheaded groundbreaking initiatives that have reshaped the landscape of our military's digital infrastructure. His visionary leadership has not only propelled the DoD's technological advancements, but has also ensured that our armed forces remain at the forefront of innovation in an ever-evolving digital landscape. With a wealth of expertise and experience, he has navigated the complex interplay between national security, technology, and information management with remarkable finesse. His strategic guidance and unwavering dedication have fortified our nation's cyber defenses, safeguarding critical infrastructure and data against emerging threats in an increasingly interconnected world. Beyond his role as a key decision maker, he has been a staunch advocate for collaboration and partnership both within the DoD and with external stakeholders. Recognizing the power of cooperation, he has forged invaluable alliances, fostering synergies between the public and private sectors to enhance our nation's technological capabilities and to ensure our collective security. Prior to his appointment as the DoD CIO, John's extensive career spanned leadership positions in various government agencies where he consistently championed innovation, efficiency, and security. His tireless dedication to public service has earned him the respect and admiration of his colleagues, and his accomplishments have garnered numerous accolades, recognizing his exceptional contributions to the field of IT. As we face an ever-changing landscape of challenges and opportunities in the digital age, we are fortunate to have John Sherman leading the charge, guiding the DoD's information strategy with wisdom, foresight, and an unyielding commitment to excellence. With his unparalleled expertise and steadfast dedication, we can be confident that our armed forces will remain agile, technologically advanced, and prepared to safeguard our nation's interests in an increasingly complex world. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a warm welcome to the Honorable John Sherman.
All right. Good morning, St. Louis and USGIF. How's everybody doing this morning? All right. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And I want to thank my colleague for the great introduction there. And what a great speech by the DNI. Talk about filling some big shoes following behind her here. So it's great to be here with you today. And I do want to thank the USGIF for the opportunity to have a few minutes to make some remarks. So I am the DoD CIO, but a number of you out here, both in the audience and watching, are probably saying, isn't that John Sherman, the guy who used to work in NGA's Iraq branch back in the day as an imagery analyst? I see you. I know what you're thinking. How did you become an IA and become the DoD CIO? And I got to be honest, every day I almost have to pinch myself from the journey I've been on over the past 26 years, from when I walked in the door at Building 213 as an imagery analyst to where I am now, serving as a member of the Office of Secretary of Defense as a principal staff assistant to Secretary Lloyd Austin. So my journey is going to be what illustrates what we're going to talk a little bit about here, which is uncomfortable innovation, pushing oneself, pushing ourselves as a nation, as a GEOINT tradecraft, as technologists, to move us to where we don't even think we can get to. And my own career may speak to that a little bit. So let me start, make sure this works, back in history. Now, some of you may know who these four gentlemen are here, but from left to right, the first one is Mr. Vince Dorenzo. Then you have Joe Sullivan. That's Dave Sullivan's dad, for those of you who used to work in the Africa branch. Jim Holmes and Dick Renninger. These are the four analysts at the National Photographic Interpretation Center in the fall of 1962 that discovered the Cuban missiles near San Cristobal, Cuba, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. These men are heroes in the pantheon of GEOINT. Now, we're going to talk about some other folks here in a minute, but as an imagery analyst, I think I speak for a lot of us who came up through that career set. looking at folks like this to understand what they did, but they're leaning on a light table there. And I know we just got rid of our last light tables just a number of years ago at NGA there. I used one myself up through OIF and so on. Now, but think about what didn't exist when they were doing their job. They didn't have uncrewed aerial vehicles. Think about what we have in the inventory now with Global Hawks, MQ-9s, even ones that can be thrown by an infantry platoon to go see around a corner. They didn't have commercial imagery. That would have been foreign to them, which is so prolific and so critical now to what we do. They didn't have GPS, which would not even be conceived of for about 11 years after when this photo was taken. They didn't have cloud computing. They didn't need to worry about cyber security. There were so many things that we have now and threats we need to face that they didn't have to worry about. And think about, this was 61 years ago. 61 years before them was 1901. Think about everything that had changed in those 6 decades from that time to when they were discovering those Cuban missiles. My concern is this, colleagues, is that what we're doing now, both in technology and GEOINT, if they were still around, should be so utterly unfamiliar to them that they wouldn't recognize it. And the challenge you have is to make sure that's the case, that we're pushing so hard that if they were here with us on this stage, they would be so mystified by where GEOINT has gone to. And areas like TCPED, tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, dissemination, would be so different now. When they used to make imagery boards, and they would do things like write cables, that we would not be doing things like that now, and pushing on all the technologies and data and capabilities we have at our disposal. That's the challenge. So, where do we live now? Here in the third decade of the 21st century in 2023. Looking at the graphic behind me, as you kind of go left to right, you see a Ukrainian soldier emplacing a Starlink antenna. Up at the top there, you see some Marines putting a SATCOM antenna up in the CENTCOM AOR. To their right, you see a 25th Infantry Division soldier doing some targeting out at Indo-PACOM. And at the bottom, you see a HIMARS multiple rocket launcher. That's in USFK AOR there, but that's become so prolific what we see in Ukraine every day. This is the world we live in right now. What we're dealing with as technologists, as intelligence professionals, as defense professionals. So let's think about what we've learned here just in the past year and a half or so, watching the Ukrainians valiantly hold off the Russian army and the Russian military, which has just been nothing short of incredible. We've learned about the criticality of the electromagnetic spectrum, or EMSO, electromagnetic spectrum operations, where you have congested and contested electromagnetic terrain where you must dominate it to be able to maneuver and win. And that battlefield has showed us the criticality of that. We've learned about positioning, navigation, and timing in PNT, where GPS remains a gold standard, but we have a battlefield where that's contested to be able to do things like precision fires and ensure that the Ukrainians can do what they need to do there. We also have, referencing the antennas there, proliferated low Earth orbit, or PLEO SATCOM capabilities. Now, I mentioned Starlink, but there are others. And think about how that has changed and democratized satellite communications that they've been able to use to their advantage on there. On a not so good news note, we've seen how cyber threatens so much, as the Russians have launched many cyber attacks against Ukraine, and some that have spilled over into Europe against our European allies, and showing how we must brace ourselves for that kind of threat in a 21st century battle space. And then we have software. I was so emboldened to read about a month ago about what the Ukrainians call their Software Warrior Brigade, or Software Warrior Team. I've seen it called by different things. It's 300,000 people writing software and updating on the fly. Their nation is under threat, and they're showing us how they can adapt quickly. And that's a lesson for us in the U.S. Department of Defense and the broader allied defense establishment here. Hardware is important, but if we don't live in a software-defined world, we're going to be behind. And also, needless to say, and I know you all have been talking about this at this conference, what commercial imagery has brought to the fight there: unclassified, shareable, ubiquitous, accurate, multispectral. I can go down the list here. And of course, our colleagues at NRO in the classified space, I know Director Scalise was up here yesterday, brings critical capabilities to us on the U.S. side, but what commercial imagery has been able to illuminate to the world of what the Russians are doing in Ukraine and also providing decision advantage has been nothing short of miraculous. And then also, moving along to open source intelligence. One of the things I had the privilege to do a number of years ago was be the deputy of CIA's Open Source Enterprise, or OSE. And think about how prolific open source has been, from social media, from photographs, from other things that some of which gets into a classified domain, but giving insight not just from classified sources. Ukraine has been the fulcrum on this, but it's showing us what we must expect going forward here in the coming years and decade or so. We can't stand still. We must push ourselves. And where are we pushing ourselves? We look to the Indo-Pacific theater, not at the expense of EUCOM or any other theater there, but clearly in our national defense strategy that the Department of Defense issued last year, our pacing challenge is the People's Republic of China and the People's Liberation Army and their constituent parts. We must look west, out to the Western Pacific, to the second and first island chains. I have no higher responsibility as the DoD CIO to make sure our forces and those of our allies can operate and survive in this terrain. Now, as Secretary Austin and Secretary Hicks has noted, war with China is neither inevitable nor desirable. But what we must ensure is every morning when they wake up in Beijing at the national leadership level, they say, not today. Not today are we going to attack Taiwan. Not today are we going to do something in the South China Sea. Not today are we going to attack U.S. Indo-Pacific allies or the United States. That's our job. Everybody in here, whether you're in industry or government, remember, not today should be our mantra. So the graphic up here, I added a few here. You see an Osprey taking off in bad weather and the USS Chancellorsville in bad weather there. Remember, we're used to fighting on land. A maritime environment, we haven't done that at this scale since our grandparents and great-grandparents fought on strings of islands in the Western Pacific in World War II. Weather matters. Distance matters. The sea state matters. Going around here, you see allies here. On the right side, you've got a U.S. soldier and a Filipino soldier setting up a mortar at an exercise just last year. At the bottom there, where you see folks coming on a 4th century on the beach, those are Australian, Japanese Self-Defense Force, and U.S. Marines conducting a 4th century operation in Talisman Sabre in 2019. And to the left of that, you see an ROK Special Operations soldier from last year conducting boarding exercises with U.S. Special Operations Forces in RIMPAC 22, where we had over 24 nations participating in that, underscoring the criticality of interoperability. So what are we doing at the Department of Defense? What am I doing as CIO working with our service colleagues, joint staff, and the combatant commands to prepare for this? First, we have the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, or JWCC, the award for which we had last December 7th, we issued it. This is something we've never had in the Department of Defense before. Cloud capability from 4 world-class vendors at all 3 security classifications, unclassed, secret, and top secret, from CONUS out to the tactical edge. And tactical edge can be where you see those Marines coming ashore, on a carrier strike group operating in the Pacific, anywhere it may need to be. And this is incredibly important to have this edge capability. Another thing we're doing, we talked a little bit about proliferated LEO on the previous chart, is transport, making sure we can get data where it needs to be. One of the things that we focus on heavily at DoD is something called DDIL. Many of you may have heard of this acronym. Denied, degraded, intermittent, or latent, meaning we're going to be cut off potentially. But I want to make it where the PRC or another potential competitor cannot cut off our forces in the Western Pacific. We're going to use a combination of SATCOM, undersea cables, HF, high frequency, and a litany of other capabilities where a Marine Littoral Regiment operating inside the second island chain can fight, win, and survive. Whether a carrier strike group operating there can stay in touch. This is something we have to do and work closely with the industry on. Also, I mentioned positioning, navigation, and timing, and working with our colleagues at Space Force and Space Command on this, making sure we have resilient GPS that's protected on orbit, that we have, and I know NGA does a lot on this front too with GPS, ensuring we have the ground segment solid, but also having redundant and backup capabilities, realizing that in a conflict, GPS and PNT may be the first things that an enemy takes a shot at kinetically or non-kinetically. I mentioned software. Having a software-defined enterprise that's not just based on hardware, but can be dynamically updated. And we just issued a software modernization implementation plan I signed out a little bit over about a month and a half ago. As we work through this and to ensure that we're able to do things like leverage JWCC, have standards for containerization, work across the DoD software factory landscape, and make us truly a software-defined enterprise that's agile, dynamic, and can be updated on the fly. And also, cybersecurity, very importantly. We're implementing what we call zero trust. Now, some of you in the tech area know what this is, but for those of you who hadn't heard of this, it's a cybersecurity principle that's based on the assumption that an enemy is already on your network. Doesn't represent a defeat, doesn't represent we're throwing in the towel, but it does get us away from traditional castle and moat sort of perimeter defenses, where principles based on micro-segmentation of your network, fine-grained access, and preventing an adversary from moving laterally across your network, a sophisticated adversary, such as the PRC or Russia or non-state actors, from getting to your most critical data. And we're going to have this in place by 2027. And then very importantly, having the ability to interoperate with those allies. Some of them are on here, but not all of them in the Indo-Pacific. We have our Five Eyes allies. We have some of the ones I've indicated on here. Matter of fact, I'm going up to Halifax for the Five Eyes DoD CIO conference we do twice a year to work with our Five Eyes colleagues. This is pick and shovel work that I know our IC colleagues work on to make sure data is able to move back and forth quickly and effectively. You hear a lot about Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2, within the Department of Defense. Now, there's various ways we describe it. Sense, make sense, and act is one way. I also like to say any data, anywhere, anytime. Another way to think about it is, as we work as allies in a potential combat situation, being able to move more quickly with greater decision authority than a large adversary like the PRC. This is critical, and working this with our Joint Staff J6, working this with our Chief Digital and AI Officer, and indeed the services and many others, and of course, critically, our allies on this, because one thing that makes our pacing challenge more nervous than just a U.S. ship transiting the Straits or in the Western Pacific is a U.S. ship alongside an Australian ship, or a Royal Navy ship, or a Japanese Navy ship in formation. The alliances are our strength, and this is so critical here, both in the Western Pacific and everything I just said for the Indo-PACOM theater, I could double down on for NATO, which we're seeing as strong as ever, with support from our allies on that part of the world as well. Now, that's just right over the horizon, but where are we going here? What are those disruptive challenges we must be ready for that we're going to have to push ourselves on even harder? So the graphics up here, you see a WGS SATCOM satellite, an AHF satellite, some CubeSats. You've got Cybercom's ops floor there. So what are we doing to kind of get over the next hill here that are not too far in the future? You hear a lot about quantum. Quantum computing is on the horizon here. Not quite here yet, but this is an area I want to make sure as CIO that we're doing everything we need, working with the National Security Agency and others, we're leaning forward on. But one thing that is right before our face here is ensuring we need quantum-resistant encryption to make sure we have the right cryptography that can stand up to very sophisticated capabilities our state adversaries could throw at us. And this is in a close partnership with NSA and others to make sure we move heaven and earth to get this done. We talked about on-orbit capabilities, and I know this has been a big topic here at the GEOINT Symposium, and hearing from Director Scalise and others you've had up on this stage. I certainly would defer to them for their expertise, but I can tell you as CIO, what I'm after here, a couple things. One, as some of the vendors are moving to on-orbit compute capabilities, keep going. This is the sort of area what, as Secretary Austin likes to say, creates dilemmas for our competitors and adversaries. Let's keep creating dilemmas for them. Put on-orbit capability, but here's the other challenge I'm going to give to you. Let's have cybersecurity on those capabilities, whether it's on the downlink, whether it's on the transect between satellites and relays, or wherever it is. We must apply cybersecurity principles to what we're doing on space. And again, I could not imagine doing this job without the Space Force as our colleagues. I meet with them regularly, meet with General Saltzman and others there on what we're doing to make sure that from my position at OSD, we're advocating for areas like robust and modern SATCOM and moving into that P-LEO terrain I talked about. And I know there's one vendor that gets a lot of attention, but there are others as well. Just earlier this year, it was actually late last year, we released something that sounds a little wonky. It's called the Enterprise Management and Control Plan that I co-signed with the head of the Space Force. It was General Raymond at the time, and then the commander at U.S. Space Comm. All three of us signing this to make sure we understand how we're going to make these piece parts fit together. Because whereas there is so much capability there on the DoD side, we must ensure we've done the hard work to have the ground segment. You know, the space segment gets a lot of the attention. I would tell this to Director Scalise if he was up here. The space segment's cool. Ground, good on you, Admiral Whitworth and others here. Let's get the ground set. And I know Mark Chatelaine and others just really work hard on that. We do that at DoD as well to ensure we can get that done. And then a couple other areas. We talk a lot about AI and ML. So I couldn't find the best graphic. So that middle graphic with the kind of artsy thing there, that's my AI and ML graphic there. Now I know ChatGPT has been all over the news here. As my friend and colleague, the Chief Digital and AI Officer of the Department of Defense, Dr. Craig Martell, will say, and maybe some of you have heard him talk in DC and elsewhere about this, what we see on ChatGPT is almost kind of a beta test that got out into the wild a little bit. It is still very early in its development, and I've read the articles like you have about how it's already being used in a number of areas, large language models, and what it can bring to decision-making and some administrative tasks. But what I'm concerned about is what it's showing us, and are we truly at an inflection point of what LLMs can show us and how we need to stay ahead of this. I've said this in other venues, and I'm going to say it here today, that I know some have advocated for taking a knee for 6 months. No, not at the Department of Defense, not the IC, because I tell you who's not going to take a knee is the People's Republic of China and Russia and others. But as we proceed, we must do it in a very responsible way. One thing we take pride on, the United States, working with our allies, is to be responsible in how we apply AI and develop it. Not in ways that that you see in China and Russia and elsewhere, but we can do this and create decision advantage for our warfighters correctly with our democratic values, applying AI on that. My job as a CIO is to make sure we have those things that I talked about a minute ago. World-class cloud compute, transport, cybersecurity, to be able to allow what we're seeing already in the GUIDE series of exercises, for example, that General Van Herk has been a real leader on at Northcom NORAD, as well as other activities that we're developing for AI and ML. We've got to be thinking about this not only at DoD, but I would challenge you in the IC and in the GEOINT community to be thinking about how this is going to be utterly disruptive to your current business model, how you're going to have to think differently about how reporting is done, about how data is ingested, about how fast you're going to have to speed on this. Which brings me to my last chart here. Let me talk about some other heroes here, both in GEOINT as well as the information technology space. Upper left-hand corner is Marie Tharp. There's a room named after her at the campus in Springfield. She discovered the Mid-Atlantic Ridge as an oceanographer, looking at that, and really did some amazing work there, and a lot of work that's done at NGA on the maritime side descends from a lot of the work she led. Next to her is Constance Babington Smith. She was an RAF photo interpreter in World War II who found the V-1 launch sites. Those were the buzz bombs, some of the first cruise missiles ever developed, when she was looking at imagery of the Peenemünde test site in northern Germany, and she had to convince some of her male colleagues the ski lift type launchers she found were actually V-1 launch sites, which completely, once she was able to get that over the line, altered targeting, altered Allied priorities for airstrikes and everything else. To her right is Katherine Johnson. Now, she's more from the technology versus GEOINT side of the house, but she's of Hidden Figures. Many of you have no doubt seen the movie, and I hope you've had a chance to read the book. World-class mathematician who, working with her colleagues at the Langley NASA Research Center, also on the field of IT as well, assisting not only John Glenn, as you saw in the movie, but all the way through the Apollo missions, showing us how that could be done. The four gentlemen already highlighted who found the SS-4 Sandal missiles in Cuba. The next picture on the bottom there, Art Lundell, the founder of the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And then finally, Margaret Hamilton, who coined the term software engineer. She's still alive and still with us, and she wrote the code for the Apollo missions, and she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom a few years ago. Why do I show you these folks here? You know why? With the exception of Ms. Hamilton, like I said, who's still on this earth here, I think the rest are in spirit with us here today. And they're challenging every one of us to say, don't rest on their laurels. We stand on their shoulders. They have shown us the way on technology and GEOINT boldly on what Ms. Tharp did, what Airman Babington Smith did at RAF. I can go around the horn on this, but don't rest on their laurels there. Move quickly. And if whatever we're doing at NGA St. Louis, Arnold, Trey, whatever you're going to end up calling NCE, I'm waiting for the title on that. It's going to be a cool one. The ground stations and everywhere else on the NGA support teams, if it looks too familiar to them, we're not moving fast enough. Because I promise you, in Beijing and Moscow, they're not adhering to any nostalgia about places like the National Photographic Interpretation Center or the Defense Mapping Agency. We respect their contributions. We honor them. But we honor them by how fast we're going to move and how restless we're going to be, because our warfighters demand no less. Thank you very much, and let's move quickly together. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty amazing. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rhonda. It's so good to be here with you.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this since you said yes.
This is the first GEOINT symposium I've actually got to attend. The only other one I went to was in 2011, helping former NGA Director Long with her iPad-enabled demonstration with Mark Riccio. If y'all remember Mark, maybe he's out in the audience here somewhere, but it's so nice to be here with you today.
I have been looking forward to it. Some of you know that John and I were imagery analysts together back at Building 213. Yep. The name is NGA Maine.
All right.
Yes, announced by Admiral Whitworth on the main stage.
Placeholder. Okay, it's a placeholder, Rhonda.
Okay. I gotcha.
All
right. Let's start.
Yep.
What I think is an easy question, and then you hit a lot of topics, so I'd like to dive a little deeper into a few of them. We were IAs.
Yep.
How do you think that your journey, starting as an imagery analyst, as an NGA-er, has influenced your thoughts as the DoD CIO?
A couple of ways, Rhonda. First, it's inherent in what NGA and the NSG and ASG does to support the warfighter first and foremost. And again, I want to compliment Admiral Whitworth for carrying on this tradition as the NGA director and with all of his leaders across the enterprise there. Working and ensuring that the warfighter has what they need, whether it has been in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, and now as we look towards Indo-PACOM and of course the Ukraine crisis, that instilled that in me. But another area I would add, Rhonda, too, is NGA is inherently, and GEOINT, a technical discipline. Now, full disclosure, I'm a history major, and I can talk order of battle all day long. And if you want to get me on an electronic light table tray, I'll be happy to come read out some imagery somewhere. But in all seriousness, during the career track I had, working in source, working in analysis, and other areas, learning about how collection works, learning about how throughput works, cloud technology, learning about how cybersecurity works, I couldn't think of a better way to maybe set myself up to be a position like this at the Department of Defense. So it has been a great foundation.
Fantastic. All right, so let's dig into a couple of the meatier topics. You talked a little bit about the joint warfighter cloud capability and what it means to the department and initiatives like JADC2. I know that you made the announcement in December. Can you talk a little bit about how you coordinate with the IC CIO and some of the other IC agencies?
Certainly. The IC CIO is Dr. Adele Merritt. And just as Director Haynes was walking off the stage, I shook her hand and was complimenting Dr. Merritt's great leadership there as the IC CIO. Now, working with Adele, as well as CIOs throughout the IC, particularly at CIA and NSA, given where they're out on some of the cloud activities, but also NGA, and I know we have Mark Chatelaine there as the head of CIOT now. So when I was the IC CIO, we led the transition from C2S, Commercial Cloud Services, to commercial cloud enterprise, which went from a single vendor, single award cloud at the 3 security classifications to a multi-vendor, multi-award. And so we made the same move there at the DoD side after we moved past the JEDI procurement, which didn't work out for a host of reasons, to JWCC. So what we needed to do, though, with the IC was there was some infrastructure that had already been built for classified use. There were joint use and co-use agreements, getting into a lot of legal and policy issues. And I specifically want to give a shout out to General Bob Skinner, the head of the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA, who really led the way on this. And we're still, frankly, Rhonda, working through some details on who's going to accredit what, how we're going to work together, for example, on Secret Cloud. But for best benefit to the taxpayer and for use to the warfighter and the IC, we've got to be in close formation on this. And Dr. Merritt and her team were critical to working through some frankly sticky legal and other issues to make sure we didn't have to rebuild infrastructure for those 4 world-class vendors who are part of JWCC but also part of C2E to minimize any burden on them. And so that's what we worked with ICCIO. And it was a heavy lift. It wasn't just the procurement and working through all of that, but also being close partners with the intelligence community.
All right, so let's follow up. I like the term sticky issues. So let's go to zero trust.
Yep.
So you mentioned that zero trust assumes that the enemy is already on our system. How do you balance the need to know versus the need to share information so that future analysts and even AIs have access to the data they need?
Absolutely. So zero trust is based on 7 pillars that the National Institutes of Standards and Technology put out. It's things like user, device, app and workload, data, et cetera. I can go around to all 7 there. Properly implemented, and one of the key parts of this is something called ICAM, Identity, Credential, and Access Management, defining who the individual or the machine is and what accesses they have, and being able to ensure that it's not a roadblock to getting to the data they need, but ensuring the need to know with their tickets, with their accesses. That's what zero trust is really built on, and done properly, and we're going to get this in place by 2027, it will prevent an adversary from moving laterally to get to that critical data. Now, probably one of the questions you're getting to, I think, as we talk about this here, are the unfortunate unauthorized disclosure issues that came up here just in the last couple of months. One thing we need to be very careful on, I was just talking with Robert Cardillo about this backstage, and I can tell you Secretary Austin has given me very direct guidance on this, is whatever measures we look to put in place, we don't turn the rear stat too far from need to share to inhibiting any sort of ability for our individuals, our women and men, either in uniform or out of uniform, who need to get to the information, restricting their access on that, but making sure we have proper data access controls. So we're working with the NSA, for example, my friend and colleague up there, Greg Smithberger, the NSA CIO, on what they learned post-Snowden and other unauthorized disclosures. And also looking at tools we have, like Intel Link on the high side and SIPR, secret side, that I have been a big user of myself, to make sure we have proper controls in place, but those that do not hinder the ability of folks to get their job done. And finally, and very importantly, user activity monitoring. NGA is a leader in this space on ensuring that we can monitor what users are doing at the different security fabrics, not only from a software perspective, but then to have humans on things called insider threat cells that can set the right alerts, curate and monitor the data, and provide that sort of component by component analysis. And so that's what we're looking at on that as we implement not only zero trust, but respond to those unauthorized disclosures.
Fantastic. Okay, let's move on to PNT. A little earlier, you highlighted the importance of DoD's positioning, navigating, and timing capabilities, and it's an important topic for the community. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
So as I went from the IC CIO to the DoD CIO, there's a few things I picked up that I didn't have on the IC side. And oversight of PNT is one of them, along with Spectrum, which I've talked a little bit about. PNT, now folks focus on the positioning and navigation piece, lest we not forget how critical timing is as well to those other aspects of this. PNT is so inherent to what we do militarily now for our civilian lives. Look at the phones many of you have in your pockets there. on what we use for banking, what we use for industry. Our potential adversaries know that as well. GPS is a national success story for the last number of decades, really since the 70s and 80s, on changing the way how we fight wars and how we operate as a society. What we must have, though, is resilient and complementary and supplemental types of PNT, realizing that even in certain tactical situations, a warfighter might have some sort of jamming or spoofing that an adversary is trying to implement against them. So we must modernize our GPS receivers, capabilities on orbit. We must have complementary sources and supplemental sources. I've talked about this often, but as I think about our warfighter, I think about an F-35 pilot as she's about to roll in on potentially an enemy surface-to-air missile site, clearing a way for additional strike operations. I don't want her even worrying about that maybe GPS coming to her cockpit has been interrupted, that she's got complementary sources, some of which we can talk about that are unclassified, things you would recognize from going back to Desert Storm, terrain and stellar navigation, and some that get into classified realms with which we work closely with NGA and others, that in her cockpit, she doesn't even know the difference. Or if there is any difference, it's not enough to affect her ability to strike the target and get out of there alive and safely. That's what PNT means to me. And we have governance over this. We work with Space Force. We work with the services. The services have gotten religion on this and are moving out. The Army, Navy, others are conducting exercises regularly at places like White Sands Missile Range to test out these capabilities. And we work with our research and engineering counterparts at DoD to suss out these new capabilities and see how that could work. And one thing that is so critical, you're going to hear a term called MOSA, Modular Open System Architecture. We need hardware that is software defined on the aircraft, on the ships and others, that can be updated, that can take in different type of sources on the fly, updated in real time, where that pilot, that navigator, that soldier, Marine, Guardian, whoever, doesn't even realize that they switched to some type of different source. That's what PNT is about. And again, it sounds a little wonky, but when you think about how critical it is to the way we do our mission, it is beyond important.
I don't think it sounds wonky at all, John. No. All right, so DoD is a really big organization with many high-level stakeholders who have their own budgets and priorities. How do you oversee such a large organization, and what mechanisms do you have in place to ensure that those strategies have teeth?
It is a team of teams. So when I was in the IC, as the IC CIO, I worked so closely with the intelligence CIOs. Mr. Chatelain's one of them here for NGA. I know you had a panel with a few of them yesterday.
Yep.
Good reporting on that. In the Department of Defense, I work very closely with the military department CIOs, the Service Sixes, as they're called, the Joint Staff J6, and also with the Combatant Command Sixes. I'm going out to Transcom this afternoon to have an all hands with their J6 team, and also, of course, to meet with General Van Ovost and her crew out there. It is a team of teams. As we work through tough, sticky issues, like how are we going to implement Zero Trust? How are we going to implement Joint Warfighting Cloud capability to the maximum extent? How are we going to work things like transport? How are we going to move capabilities to SIPRNet and harden SIPRNet to make sure that warfighting network is there when we need it and ready to be used? We have different types of governance, MILDEP CIO meetings. We have Cyber Council that I co-chair. We bring things to the Deputies Management Action Group that Secretary Hicks chairs, where we bring tough problems up there on where we look at things like how are we going to get after technical debt within the department. Technical debt, in a nutshell, are areas where maybe fighting the Taliban or ISIS, we didn't need to worry about cyber hardening our aircraft and ships and tanks. We sure need to be thinking about that if we may have to conduct contingencies in the Western Pacific or in Eastern Europe. A big thing I have is an authority, this isn't all just kumbaya and hugs, is something called Budget Certification Authority. This is something I didn't have in the IC, but my position as DoD CIO has it. So at the beginning, not at the beginning of the fiscal year, but around the beginning of the calendar year, I promulgate something called Consolidated Programming Guidance, or the CPG. And that goes out, and that's where, and we've coordinated this, where we put out what we want to do, Rhonda, on cloud, cyber, C3, We work with CDAO on data and some other things on there, how critical that is to bring that together. And it talks about where we're going to want to see investments from the services, from the DoD components, the defense agencies and field activities. We work closely with intelligence and security on the kind of overlap with the defense intelligence organizations. But going forward then, throughout the year, so we're doing this right now as we look at the FY25 budget build, we're watching kind of what the services are doing and where the money's going. And then come autumn time frame, we're going to have some hard discussions. And we realize that services have competing authorities as they have to make investments in, say, different combat vehicles or survivability or in personnel, very, very important on the talent issues. But we can't scrimp on the cyber and IT pieces. We have a $58.5 billion budget for IT and cyber in the Department of Defense. That's bigger than the Marine Corps' budget, with all respect to my Marine brethren out here. That's a big responsibility to have to oversee that, because at the end of the year, I do something called budget certification, where I have to attest to the Secretary of Defense that the services and others have made the appropriate investments that we directed them to at the beginning of the year. And I can decertify an IT budget. And that's a nuclear option here. But well before we get to that, we make sure that we have laid out our expectations, that there's no surprises. And just this past year, I won't say which service, but one of them, we had to let them know we weren't happy on a couple of areas here. And the undersecretary from that service immediately worked with us to talk about how they're making the investments. They were retiring some capabilities where we didn't have to lean in on that, and we came to closure. But this isn't the hugs and get along with you. This is where I've got to conduct rough oversight here where needed, and we do it where possible. So that's what budget certification is about.
All right, thank you. All right, so now I'd like to switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about the workforce. Yep. I don't know if you remember this, many years ago when John was a manager, an imagery manager in Building 213, I was on rotation as the aide to the director of NGA. Well. And I got a call, hey Rhonda, I need a favor. You had an employee that had a speech impediment that was an amazing analyst, yet the thought of going to a big morning intelligence briefing was insurmountable for this person. Do you want to tell a little bit about what you did there?
Director Clapper at the time immediately said, have this individual, it was on Korea, I won't go into more details on that, come to my office and let's do a desk side. So one, that's a testament to Jim Clapper's leadership and care for his folks, which again, I know subsequent NGA directors have embodied. But to have that individual with the tough speech impediment be able to, and the amazing analysis this person was doing, to walk through imagery analysis with Director Clapper, following every piece of what that individual was putting out there, that was one of my proudest moments as a manager, to be able to open that opportunity for that person. I'll tell you this too, on talent, this has been a major focus for us in the Department of Defense. Just earlier this year, I signed out, well I didn't sign, the deputy did, we teed it up for her, a cyber workforce strategy on how we're looking at how we identify, recruit, retain, and upskill new talent to come in and work IT and cyber issues. Let me tell you what this is really about. I want a workforce that looks like America, where we enhance our diversity, don't go to the same wells over and over again, because if we tap into the full talent of this nation, no country can stand up to us. But it's going to require deliberate efforts by all of us to expand that aperture out there. And that's really, if you want to know that there's a lot of nuts and bolts on this strategy, that's what I'm after there. And also realizing folks in STEM fields may not want a 30-year government career, may want to come in and out of government, and we've got to figure out how to make that work. And the implementation plan for that strategy is coming out in the next few weeks here, which really gets down to the nuts and bolts of how we're going to do that. So for those of you who've worked in the five-sided building, you know there's a strategy, kind of lays out the vision, and then the implementation plan, the old I plan that comes out, and that's going to be critical to how we move forward. Talent is so important. We can talk zero trust in clouds and space-based capabilities all day long. If we don't have the women and men who are motivated, trained, diverse, and ready to lean in, that is the technology is secondary. So our talent is our most important priority.
Okay, nice try at the deflection there and giving the credit to General Clapper. For me, that example shows your uncomfortable innovation, right? Even so early in your career, and your compassion. right? And you don't often let that part out, John. You are an amazing leader. Final question. What advice do you give those young, aspiring GeoInters, cyber-ers, IC or DoD employees?
Lean in when you have an opportunity to learn new things. I've had numerous opportunities, for example, to help with the FY16 budget build at NGA. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm an imagery person. And you know what? Had I not done that, I wouldn't be where I am today. Learn about international partnerships, where you and I worked together on that at the former Office of International Affairs and Policy, now IA. Learn about congressional engagement. Senator Blunt, sir, before you seeing the bright lights, I could barely see you there, sir, but it's great to have a member of Congress here. As you have a chance to engage both members as well as their staff, that's invaluable. They represent our nation, the people for whom we work. And outside the Beltway bubble, a lot of us live in. I know I'm in St. Louis, and this is not in the Beltway bubble. I'm happy to be here, but learn how to do that. Learn about, a lot of us are technologists here in some way, shape, or form, but learn new things. My aha moments came not only at NGA, but when I was at the CIA Open Source Enterprise, and we came up with an idea for some low-side, unclassified cloud capabilities. That was a pivot point for me to be able to bring that to the 7th floor at CIA, get funding for that, and move along. So I could go down other areas as well. And talent management. When I say talent management, yes, there's DSIPs and getting evals in on time. I'm talking about how we really diversify and make our workforce even better. Lean into those opportunities. And the final thing is, you're gonna, for those of you who are early in your career, you may end up on some place you may not even think. And while I was sitting where you were, just as short as 6 or 7 years ago, I would not have believed you for all the money in the world that I'd be the DoD CIO, Senate confirmed, sitting up here. Just be ready for when that knock on the door comes. It was when Senator Dan Coates asked me if I wanted to be the IC CIO in 2017, a door opened. And then in the new administration, getting the chance to be able to serve here as the DoD CIO. So it's been a great run.
It's been wonderful. John, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for so many strong messages, both about how you're leading in the community and how we are increasing the diversity of our community and the strength of our community. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.